Hi everyone, welcome to the Writers Book Club podcast, where each month we take a deep dive with an author into the writing craft and process behind one of their books. I'm Michelle Barraclough, and this month I had the absolute pleasure of chatting with Australia's #1 young adult fiction author, Lynette Noni. The Prison Healer is the first young adult fantasy novel I've read in quite a while, and I just loved diving into the amazing world that Lynette created. I could visualise the prison and the characters so vividly, and let me tell you, Lynette knows how to keep you turning the pages. I felt like I was in very capable hands throughout the entire novel. Now, it doesn't surprise me one bit that she's the #1 YA fiction author. When I ran the competition on my socials to give away a copy of The Prison Healer, it absolutely went off. She has some very passionate and dedicated readers. I was really sad that I could only give one copy away. Lynette and I talked about writing YA and fantasy, of course, but she also spoke about the process of planning and writing a series, what inspired the world of The Prison Healer, and how she goes about creating the distinctive layered characters. I reckon her experience and advice on those things really transcends genre. I got so much out of our chat, and I really think you will too, no matter what genre you write in. So, a little bit about Lynette. After studying journalism, academic writing and human behaviour at university, Lynette finally ventured into the world of fiction. She's now a full-time writer and the best-selling author of the 6-book young adult fantasy series, the Medoran Chronicles, as well as a second best-selling and award-winning series called Whisper. Lynette won the 2019 ABIA Award for Small Publishers Children's Book of the Year, along with the 2019 Gold Inky Award. She's currently collaborating on a project with #1 New York Times bestselling author of the Throne of Glass series, Sarah J. Maas. The first book in Lynette's new series, The Prison Healer, which we're talking about today, was released globally in April this year, with the sequel, The Gilded Cage, coming in October, which is this month. So look out for that one. I hope you enjoy listening to my deep dive with Lynette Noni into her best-selling novel, The Prison Healer. Enjoy. Lynette, it is absolutely delightful to be speaking to you. Thank you for coming on the podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm delighted to be here.
Now, this novel, The Prison Healer, what a page turner and what an ending. I did not see that massive twist coming at all, like complete surprise. I have the next book in the series, The Gilded Cage, burning a hole on my bedside table, and I'm pretty sure I know where my weekend is going to disappear to. We will talk about writing a series a bit later, but I wanted to first talk about the genesis of this novel, The Prison Healer, and what came first for you, the premise and the plot, or a particular character?
It's an interesting question because it was kind of if we're talking chronologically, it would have been a character, but I didn't realize that at the time until a few months later, in which case it was actually the setting. So at the beginning of 2019, I was traveling and I was overseas, and just in passing, I met this young woman and we had a meal together. Like, as you travel, you kind of just meet people and you talk with them quickly. And for some reason, it's such a safe place that, like, you get to know each other really quickly.
Yep.
And then you never see them again.
Yeah. We've all had those, I think.
Yeah. So this woman, I don't know her name now. I don't know if I knew her name then, but she just told me about her story, about how she had grown up in an impoverished nation. And when she was a teenager, her father was seen shaking hands with a member of an opposing religious faction. And this country was really kind of at war with a lot of different reasons. And he was actually, just purely for shaking hands, he was taken to jail, to prison. And not just him, they actually came up to her entire family. They were considered, political prisoners. So she, her mother, her sisters were taken to a different prison. Her father was taken to this torture prison. She was taken to like this kind of like a limbo waiting prison. And they thought that they would be let out. It was a misunderstanding. They thought they'd be let out in 1 day, 2 days, 3 days passed. 5 years passed before she was actually ever let out in the world. And her father, like, she hadn't had any contact with him. She had no idea if he was alive. She had a couple of other siblings on the outside. I think they were brothers. And because they were over 18, they thought that the government would come for them, so they fled the country before anyone, but the women and the children, they thought they'd be safe. Anyway, her story, it was just one of those moments where you realize just how privileged you are where you grow up, and that this kind of thing, at least where I grew up, it didn't happen, not widely anyway, not here in Australia. We have our own injustices, we have our own problems, but like that is just, it really hit me, and I think that's the word I will repeat, but that injustice of her story just kind of stayed with me. But again, it was a fleeting moment, a passing time. I went on like in a different direction to her, like physically. I went on in my travels, she went on in her travels. And that was kind of, it lingered in my mind as a, wow, that was, you know, what a life she's lived. And it was also her agency while she was in the prison. Once she realized she was there to stay, she's like, what can I do? What can I do? And so she taught herself English, and she cozied up to the guards so that they would like her and treat her and her mother well. And she, you know, she started to like study and learn and do what she could. And just her incredible resourcefulness and everything about her, I was just really like, wow, what a human being, you know. But anyway, so I continued my travels. I came back home. I then went on tour, like book tour. I had the final book in my 6-book series release. And so that was a, you know, like, I think it was like 16 days of event after event after event. And it's just, my brain just went straight back into work mode. And a couple of months later, so that was in around January, February of 2019. That I met her. But then in around May, June, I was traveling in Australia. I was over in Perth for the Scribblers Festival, which is a children's literary festival, which is just such a fantastic event. And I had a day off in between the sessions that I was speaking at, and everyone just kept telling me, you need to go out to Fremantle Prison. And like, you just the amount of people that told me, I just kept saying, why do I look like the kind of person that just likes to visit prisons willy-nilly? But the amount of people that told me, and I was like, okay, all right, I'm now too curious not to go. And so I went out, and Fremantle Prison is this, it's a heritage listed prison. It no longer has any inmates, but you can do tours. And so I went in, and what really appealed to me was this really cool, they had this tunneling tour. And I was like, you know, cool, adventure, fun, let's do this. The prisoners at Fremantle, they had to dig tunnels to supply water for the prison, and then later for the township of Fremantle when there was a big storm that caused all these problems. And so what I did was I did this tunneling tour, and you go down these terrifying ladders deep into the earth, and you walk through these tunnels that are like really narrow and scary, and then even scarier, you hop in this like paddle boat and go through the ones that are partially submerged. And it was the most amazing experience. And while I was in this boat deep beneath this prison paddling along, and I was going to say the guard, the tour
I was going to say, I feel like I've read this story somewhere.
I know, exactly. Well, while I was in this little canoe thing, and the guide turned off all the lights, like we only had headlamps, but she's like, everyone turn off your lights and see what it would have been like for the prisoners when they had, like, you know, their lanterns went out or whatever. And it was just like, I'd never felt like so alone and isolated, because it was just dark and you couldn't hear anything. You didn't know if anyone was with you. You had no idea how to get out if someone had just disappeared. And I just had this light bulb moment of I'm feeling so much right now, and I need to put this and this space into a book. And so when I was back above ground, I was so, you know, intrigued by the rest of the prison that I went back that night and I did a night tour. It was actually a ghost tour, but I missed all the scares because I was looking at like the cells and the flogging post and the hangman's noose, which was so eerie, and hearing these tales of these, not even tales, these actual real life stories of these prisoners. And it just kind of, I don't know how the two things meshed, but, you know, the injustice that I felt in the prison linked my mind up to this woman who I'd met and the injustice of her story. And so I kind of merged the idea of someone who had been wrongly imprisoned for a length of time through no fault of their own. And like this concept just kind of spiraled. And then obviously mine became more about the fantasy elements. There's magical trials and a lot, there's like a sickness that goes around the prison and all these other kind of things. But so it wasn't really the plot that came to me. It was more being in this prison and just feeling the world, and then remembering, I don't want to call her a character, but the woman who I'd met and like her story, and then forming my own creation out of it. That is a very long-winded answer.
No, it's all good. It's all good. I think people love hearing about the inspiration behind novels, especially when they're fully invested in the characters and the world that you've built. What you were just describing then about the tunnels, that almost word for word is what you've written.
I mean, I definitely drew inspiration. Like the prison that I created, Zalendov prison, it is a labor prison. It's horrible. It's a death prison. But one of the labor things is that the prisoners tunnel out the water. Mm-hmm. And I definitely Fremantle is by that. Absolutely. There's other parts of, like, there's quarriers and there's people, lumberyard people, and there's, other awful allocations that people have that I thankfully didn't have to witness to get. But that central part of the tunneling there was definitely, from purely because I was there and I just felt so much. So
yeah. And then the character of Kiva came from where?
Well, I don't sit down before a book and map out a character. I know a lot of authors who do that. They'll write a list of attributes, they'll write a list of personality traits, they'll write a list of, who this person is going to be. I am the kind of writer, I like to get to know the character as I'm writing them, because I feel like as a reader, you get to know the character as you're reading about them. So the voice of the character has to come to me pretty strongly. And so Kiva as a character, I knew the basic elements of her. I knew that she had been in prison for 10 years. I knew that the prologue in The Prison Healer, you can see that she's close with her family. You can see that her father, she's with her father and her younger brother when these soldiers come and take them away. And it's only a short prologue. You don't at that point know what is going on, why they're being taken away, what is happening, and then some other devastating things happen in that moment that you don't find out until later. But so those kind of things, they were my basis for knowing her. But I also had to consider who I wanted her as a character, in the sense that I have 2 other series that I've written, and one of them, the Medoran Chronicles, the main character, Alex, she's a warrior, and she learns to be a fighter, she learns combat, and she learns all kinds of things like that. She's not very good to start with, she has no idea what she's doing, but over the course of the 6 books, she really learns and she grows into that physically strong character. In my Whisper series, there's a magical element to it that is like a magical kind of strength of this character. There's an inner strength, but there's also that physical manifestation of that. And so I wanted, coming into The Prison Healer, something a bit different. I didn't want a character who would be physically strong. There's so many different kind of strengths, and I thought this character, she's survived in the worst kind of place for 10 years, and she's somehow kept her humanity. And not only that, she's the healer, she's the prison healer. She works hard to, a mundane healer, so she works hard with herbs and this little tiny little garden that she has to kind of create these things to try and save these people who are, some of them are good. There's an 11-year-old boy who is just a sweetheart, and again, wrong place, wrong time, and he gets stuck there.
I love Tip. He's one of the best characters, isn't he?
Tip is just this little ray of sunshine. He's honestly
beautiful.
Probably the only thing that, this book is really quite dark, but then he bounces into the room and he just smiles, and you're like, okay, everything's okay. I can get through this next chapter. But so Kiva, I needed the balance of that. And so, there are other prisoners who deserve to be there. They're murderers. They've done horrible things, but she still treats them all. And so I wanted her strength to be this compassion. And so when I was creating her as a character, that was really kind of what I honed in on. And I used that to get to know her and to guide her, her dialogue, but also her character and the arc of everything that she would do next. And so that was kind of how her creation came about.
I can see that, because when you read The Prison Healer, you've got those 3 prongs really of the character, haven't you? What she says to others, what she says inside her own head, and what she does. And all of that points to somebody who's really compassionate and against the odds, and despite people being absolutely awful to her at times, she has that inner goodness. So it's a really great example, I think, of how you take those craft elements and create a character.
Thank you.
So let's keep going with the characters. They all have very strong, distinctive voices. How do you find the voice for each character, and how do you go about differentiating them?
Well, I think a lot of it does come back to getting to know your characters. So if we use that I mean, we just talked about Tip, who's this
Yes.
little 11-year-old boy. And so, when I considered his character, I knew I wanted him to be a light in the darkness of this place. He's been there for 3 years. Shortly after his arrival, he came in with his mother because his mother was accused of stealing and he wouldn't let her go. And so the guards dragged him with her. And this is just how unjust this world is, at least at this point in time. And so, he was dragged in there. His mother died very shortly afterwards. And Kiva kind of, I don't know, he's kind of like a little barnacle. Like, he kind of attaches himself to Kiva especially, and especially because he was allocated work in the infirmary with her. And the thing about Kiva is, yes, I said before that she's very compassionate, but she's also extremely guarded. She has lost too many people. She won't let anyone in. She refuses to kind of, I mean, you can tell that she's fighting it. You can tell that she adores like this young boy, but at the same time, she's so adamant to keep him at arm's length because in her mind, everyone is going to die. She's going to lose. She's already lost so much, her family. And, she sees like people at Zalendov at this prison tend to have a lifespan of 6 to 12 months at best. And so she just doesn't want that hurt anymore. But Tip is kind of this little character who just will wiggle his way in there and just latch on. And so he's done that with Kiva. And so to create his voice, I wanted, it's almost like, and I know he's a lot older, but I really kind of imagine, what's his name? Tom, who plays Spider-Man, Peter Parker.
Oh, yes.
And he's just like, I know he's older, and I know he's, and even as an actor, I know he's older, but like he really manages to channel this boyish kind of playfulness and that everything's always going to be okay no matter what. And that's kind of like, Tip's a lot younger, but he kind of has that. He's in the worst place he could be, but he's like, I'm going to play a prank on the guards. He's constantly optimistic, constantly bubbly. And when he has to like go and find these rats, he's like, oh, rats to play with. Yay. It's like, no, that's gross. Don't be excited about that. But so he was such an easy character to write because it was so easy to write this constantly happy character. And over the course of the series, I know we're going to talk about series a bit later, but over the course of the series, it was really interesting to play with those threads and to see what might push his boundaries in other circumstances, especially, I don't want to give any spoilers, but especially later in the series when circumstances are different. So Tip was a delight to write and very easy to keep in character. Kiva, I've already touched on about her compassion, so I let a lot of that guide her voice and her being guarded and protective. And that gets challenged a lot when there's a couple of new characters kind of arrive at the prison. Jaren and Nari are two main characters. Nari is a guard, and she's been there a little while, and Kiva is a bit distrustful of her, but at the same time, Nari is not as horrible as the other guards. She sometimes seems to stand up for Kiva, look after her a little bit more than some of the others who might be a bit more malicious. And so Kiva doesn't trust her at all, but slowly Nari kind of becomes less horrible, and so Kiva has to sort of slowly let her walls down in that way as well. But Jaren, who's an inmate who arrives, like I think in like the second chapter or something, and he's also a main character. And so Kiva towards him, he's not like Tip in that bubbly sense, but he's very wanting to get to know Kiva, and she's very wanting to keep him away. So her interactions with him are also really interesting for her voice to like have her. It brings out a bit more of a snarky, sarcastic side of her sometimes because, she can kind of let that any kind of humor that she's kind of kept inside for protective reasons kind of helps push him away. So that's kind of Kiva's voice. To circle back on Nari and Jaren. Jaren was interesting because you only get to know him through Kiva's eyes. Same with Nari, same with all of them. And so you kind of see him as she sees him. And at first he's just this annoying person who just won't seem to die. Not that she wants him to die, but she's expecting him to die very fast. And he's just kind of always there, and he's always bothering her, and she doesn't know why he won't leave her alone. That makes him sound horrible. He's not at all horrible.
Oh, no. I actually think he brings out in Kiva that dark humour that comes through eventually. And then they have that lovely sort of interplay where it's just sort of, almost bagging each other out about different things. And it's a really great relationship. I really liked the way that developed.
Oh, thank you. I think it comes down to he kind of challenges her. He challenges her to pull her out of her shell. So much of this first book is Kiva learning to trust other people and learning that it's okay to let people in. And Jaren kind of, if Tip is the little barnacle that attaches himself to her, Jaren is the person that draws her out of herself and tells her that it's okay to trust people. It's okay to let people in. And yes, okay, maybe bad things will happen, but that's life. And if it does, at least you'll then have people to get through those things with. And so Jaren's voice, to answer that question, I read a lot of YA books and I write a lot of YA books, and there are certain things that I don't love to read as a reader, and therefore I try to avoid writing as a writer. And so even though I know I'm writing teenagers, I try to avoid that teenage angst. And so I try to do a lot of that through the other characters. And so Jaren, I can't remember how old he is. I think he's 19, 18 maybe. 18, I should remember my own character's age. Kiva's 17, and I don't think Jaren's age is ever stated. I think he's a year or two older than her. It's kind of what it is. And so, I wanted him to be mature, but still fun and still young, but at the same time have that kind of worldliness of, we don't know why he's in the prison. We don't know why he's sentenced there. We know very vague details about him from Kiva's perception. So she can tell that he is healthy. She can tell that he's lived a reasonably good life until he was sent there. He says a couple of things about his family that make her think that maybe his family kind of went against him and don't want anything to do with him. And just a couple of things here or there that just, that just hints for her to think about, who is this person? What did he do here? But one of the main rules at Zalandov is you don't ask another prisoner why they're in prison. And so she can't really say, hey, did you murder someone?
What did you do?
Or are you here like me because you actually shouldn't be here? She always has to keep her guard up in that sense. So anyway, writing Jaren's voice was trying to hone in on that and who I wanted him as a character, and knowing where I wanted him to go in the future as well. So keeping him in character for everything that would come next, but bringing him to a place where he could be a voice in Kiva's ear, encouraging her, challenging her. Jaren is very smart, and I think within moments of meeting Kiva, he kind of had a pretty good idea of someone who'd been very isolated for a very long time, doing a very awful job. One of the first things Kiva has to do when a new inmate arrives at the prison is she has to carve a Z mark into their hand, into the back of their hand. It'll end up being a scar that makes them property of Zalandov. And so that's one of the first things that Kiva has to do to Jaren. And, he is unconscious at the time, I believe. But, he wakes up and he knows very quickly that, A, she's healing him because he's arrived beat up. And so she's stitching up wounds. But at the same time, she's also hurt him because that's her job. And so she is this dual nature of personalities. And I think he knows very quickly that, okay, this is someone who actually could really use a friend and maybe isn't as awful as, he's probably a little bit too trusting early on. He's just suddenly in this death prison and he's like, hey, we can all be friends. And Kim's like, no, that's not how it works here. And it takes a little bit of time for him to kind of, ground himself and realize. I think he has a couple of altercations with other prisoners later on. I think maybe that's a bit of a wake-up call as well. He's not protected in any way. So all of that really does shape him. And I think the main point to your question is I want to give these characters three-dimensionality. I want to give them flaws, and I want to give them strengths, and I want to give them weaknesses, and all those things come into creating their voice. But then you have characters like Mott, and he actually audibly, if we can use that word, has an interesting voice because he has an accent when he talks. And I use that on page, or Tip, I should actually even say Tip has a stutter, there are different actual craft things that you can use to bring across different voices if we're talking about the actual audible voice as well. So yeah, all these things you just kind of take into account. And interestingly, it has nothing to do with me because I don't rate the audiobooks, but with the audiobook narrator, she does her own things. And there's a couple of characters who because she's American, so a couple of characters have American accents, some she's given English accents and Cockney accents and all these different things. It's so really interesting to see what she's done with some of the characters. And when I hear it now, I'm like, oh yeah, that makes sense. And other times whoa, wait, hang on, what's going on there? So
that's not how I heard it in my head when I was writing it.
That's also the beauty of reading. Yeah. Everyone hears things differently. Yep. And I love that. So
I love that too. So you touched on craft then. So I'd love to go into the sort of the plotting and outlining. The Prison Healer has such rich, complex plotting, both the external, conflict in the world outside Zellendorf, and that's the sort of macro, then the conflict within the prison, then we're sort of zeroing in here, then the trial by ordeal is another whole plot thread, and then Kiva's own journey and character arc, as well as all the other characters. Can you tell us your process for developing or really managing all these elements in the writing itself? Are you a fast writer? Do you just get it all out, or do you plan it first? How does that all work?
I am a fast writer. I think I wrote this book, it was either 26 or 28 days, so it was very fast.
Wow, and it's not a short book.
It's not a short book, no. And
well done.
I mean, partly like this book was just bursting out of me. I wrote it in that just straight after I'd visited the prisons in the middle of 2019. At the beginning of 2019, I released the final book in my Medoran Chronicles, which was, again, I said before, 6 books. And then at the end of 2019, I released the final book in my Whisper Duology. So I was in between releasing the 2 biggest books of my career at that point. The previous year, I'd released 3 books. And I was in this insane time that I hadn't actually had a chance to write anything new for a while. It was been a lot of editing and a lot of working on things that had already been kind of built up to that point. So when I had the chance to sit down and write, this just like exploded out of me. And so to answer that question about, how I handled it, I have no idea. I remember I told you, so the idea of the world came to me pretty clearly, and I knew I wanted to challenge myself. Every time I write a new book or series, I want to challenge myself. And so with that, I would normally go for an expansive kind of world. And I was like, I would love to set a book inside one place and to make a world out of that one place. And so that's what I did. I created this prison that has different areas. It has the tunnels, which we mentioned, it has the quarry, and it has the Lumbia, and it has this aquifer, which is this big underground water system. It has the infirmary, and it has, all these little places in amongst this one place. And I had to kind of build on that and make it interesting enough that people don't get bored to be essentially in the one setting. But that was all at the beginning of it. And so that's all I had. I knew I wanted a character who'd been locked in this place, and I knew I had the place. And so I just had to be like, and then it's I as an author of fantasy largely, it's so hard to write magic, guys. It's hard because if you let it can be limitless. You have to add boundaries. You have to have, and so I remember sitting at the beginning of the prison, I'm like, yes, I'm just going to have a fantasy world, no magic. And I was like, but I'd really like to have, maybe just a little bit of magic, elemental magic over here. And what if there's some other magic? And I just remember thinking, can I do it? I don't want to do it. And I was like, but I've never done elemental magic before. So what could I do with that? And what if there's this and then I started researching, I don't know how I fell down a rabbit hole of medieval punishments, because I'm like, well, she's in a prison. What kind of things could she face? And what could some of the big actual challenges be? And I stumbled upon our real world, all these documents about, not documents, all these articles about a thing called the trial by ordeal. And it was I can't remember the medieval times for us. And so that was a lot of the witch hunting kind of things, where the trial would be a trial by water, and they'd try to where they try to drown them, and if they drowned, they were
human.
Yeah, exactly.
Not a witch.
Yes. So there was that. There's the trial by fire, which is when they burn people at a stake. But anyway, so that kind of really pushed me into thinking I would love to do a magical trial by ordeal. What if I amped up the stakes and if I brought in these elemental magic elements, and so there's a trial by air, trial by water, trial by fire, and trial by earth, and how I might do those. And in the midst of that, I was also researching prisons, horrible prisons throughout our history. I remember reading this Amnesty International report on Tadmor prison in Syria, and it was it left me with nightmares. This is a real life current day prison, and it's just it was awful. But then also concentration camps and all those kind of horrible things, all of that was shaping the world I was creating and helping me at the same time figure out how I might put these magical trials into it. And so all these things started to kind of shape together in my head, but there was still something missing. And at that time I was like, there needs to be, okay, yes, I want this trial by ordeal. I want this overarching plot, this concept of there's these rebels who are fighting against the crown and who are trying to steal the kingdom. And so how does that work in with Kiva? Kiva's not a rebel, but the rebel queen is sentenced to Zalendov, and she arrives at Zalendov, and Kiva is tasked with keeping her alive, or else Tip will die. So there's a few complications to get in there that add the character depth of it, but then add to the plot, and that drives Kiva to give her agency to do what she has to do. But I also needed another element to actually be against Kiva directly, and so that's when there is this stomach sickness kind of plague thing spreading around the prison. And as the healer, she's the one who has to stop people dying. So not only does she have to face this sickness, she also has to keep Tip alive. She has this new prisoner, Jaren, who is just always there. And then she has this rebel queen who is very, very sick, who can't speak, who can't see, who can't sit up, and who is suddenly, has to do this trial by ordeal. And so Kiva, it's a bit of a spoiler, but it's written in the blurb, but Kiva takes her position in order to keep her alive, in order to keep Tip alive. So it's this convoluted thing of who is trying to save who and why, and whose motives are what and why. And then Kiva has to try and survive this completely unsurvivable thing. And so all these things meshed together in my brain. And then just kind of, as I said, that just kind of all came out in a very short period of time, and the book was born.
So you just write it. There's no sticky notes or charts on the wall or spreadsheets or anything like that.
There is a whiteboard. There's a whiteboard. I have this process. I use Scrivener as a program to keep track of all my characters and everything, and even just the stuff like eye color, because you get to the book and you're like, wait, were their eyes blue or green? I can't remember it. I can't make a note of it now. And even I have big things about the world, just a little because Scrivener is the best program for any writer listening to this. I cannot I don't actually write in Scrivener. I know I know a lot of people who have Scrivener write in it.
You just organise your world in that. And the research and everything, that all goes in as well?
Everything is in there. Everything is in, it's like my, I know, it's like my mental happy place, but in a physical form on my computer. It keeps everything so organised and out of my head. And then I have a Word document for the writing. So I can kind of switch back between them. I don't know why. I think maybe because I started writing in my career on Word before I ever learned about Scrivener. And the reason I moved to Scrivener was because at one point when I was working on the Medoran Chronicles, I think I was the third book in, and I had so many different Word documents for all the different characters and all the different world things and all the different magic systems and all the different everything, that my computer would just constantly crash over and over. And then I was flicking through so many things, and it was just so hard. And that's when I was like, what can I get to help me organize this? And that's when I learned about Scrivener, and it just I could have cried. When I started using it, it was just such a relief to be I can just flick between the tabs and it's all right there.
It's all there. I love it too. That's so interesting though that you don't actually write in it, so you don't organize chapters and have it all. No?
Well, I don't know. I haven't been given this much thought, but I think it's purely because I write so fast. I know a lot of people who use Scrivener for that purpose. Yes. They organize their chapters. They have a plan for the next whatever. They have all their outlines and everything. And I don't use any of that. And it's also completely honestly, I'm not wonderfully technologically proficient. So I think the idea of learning how to use all the facets of Scrivener really overwhelmed me at the beginning. And I just thought I'll use it in the most basic way. And so I kind of still use it in the most basic way.
Well, and to be fair, you have to export it out of Scrivener to send it to the publisher, and then that because
they send here, and I'm I'm just as likely to lose half of it in the transfer, and
because all the edits come back in Word, don't they? In track changes,
So so I don't know, and I think then because then I also would edit in Word, at least until you get your past pages and everything, until the typesetting is done. So it's I think my poor little brain just handles it if it's all just in the one place.
Yes, that makes sense, especially when you're juggling the complex world, or worlds, I should say, of all your different series. So when you sit down to write a chapter or a scene of The Prison Healer, do you think about what that scene needs to achieve before you actually start writing, in terms of moving the story forward or increasing the tension or the conflict? What happens in your brain when you sit down to write?
I feel like there's not a huge amount of thought process that goes into it. It probably isn't the answer that you want. I would say that what I actually try to do is a bit like a snowball falling down a hill. So instead of sitting down to write a scene or chapter, I try to make sure that the previous scene or chapter ended at a point that it can roll straight on into the next one and build on that. So a lot of my chapters, especially in the later books of this series, and I think in The Prison Healer too, a lot of the chapters will kind of end on a mini cliffhanger, which kind of makes you then want to jump straight into the next chapter so that you can find out, like you'll get like a sentence or a statement or just like a, bum, bum, bum kind of feeling that as a reader makes you not want to stop there because you need to find out what happens next, hopefully. But as a writer, that also helps keep me with the momentum and to know. So every day when I go in to write whatever's next on that day, I always reread the last couple of paragraphs of the previous chapter. I'm not an author who stops mid-scene or mid-chapter on one day. Like, I'm not a 9 to 5 author. I don't think, 5 o'clock closing time. I'm right into the dead of the night if it means getting that particular scene out, because I feel like if you're in that moment, the voice is so clear in your head and the scene and the feeling and the emotion is so with you. And I don't like the idea of waking up the next day and being of a different mind frame that might distort what I was working on then. So I will always go back, reread what I've just written the previous day and then roll straight on from there. And so sometimes that's a nice point and the previous chapter does kind of end it and they all went to sleep happily. And so you know that the next chapter is starting afresh and you kind of do like a big breath in. Okay, and what's happening today? In which case on those days, I kind of treat every chapter a little bit like a mini book. I try to have if it's a chapter that doesn't roll straight on from a cliffhanger chapter, it's a moment where, I'll have a moment where you're starting off at a nice point and then I'll build it up to whatever that scene is going to require, and there'll be almost a climactic kind of problem, and often I'll try and build it up until the end of the chapter so that the next chapter can then go on from there. But if it is going to be like an arc kind of thing, then I try and keep making like that. The thing about YA especially, a lot of books, but YA in particular, is that the pace does have to be fast because our target audience has a short attention span. I mean, as a reader, I have a short attention span. I'll always pick a YA book. My brain just wants to get straight into the action and to get to know the characters. In general, with a YA book, you tend to know that you're going to get a lot of character development, a lot of action, a lot of adventure, and straight into the story and into the meat of it. And so I try to keep that in my mind as I'm writing so that I make sure that I'm keeping people's attention. Teenagers have, they want to be doing stuff. And so I get that. And I feel like that even as a non-teenager. So I try in every scene I write and every chapter I write to have that. But the thing is, you have to also let your readers breathe. So there has to be slower moments. There has to be a lot of those action moments, but there also has to be a lot of the emotional moments that kind of just tug you in. And so those can be the slower, softer moments. But then there can just be a couple of moments that just kind of in between the action and the crazy, just go, okay, everything is okay. Take a breath, eat this chocolate with that character while they're just having some downtime, and prepare yourself for what comes next. So I think to answer your question, it's like almost an intuitive mental kind of awareness of knowing what you've just written, of knowing what's ahead, and then fitting in what you're currently writing to balance all of that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I loved what you were saying about treating those non-cliffhanger chapters as an arc. And This is a podcast. Lynette was doing big waves with her hands. So arcs.
I didn't even realise.
Yeah, and now I'm doing it as well. Arcs, yeah. So that's so useful. Do you ever sit down and think, I'm not quite sure where to start? Or do you always have something? You always have an idea if you're, in the shower or walking around going, yep, that's where I'm going to start the next chapter.
No, I don't know if there's many days when I do know what I'm doing. So I think I have to have the mentality of just write. If it doesn't work out, go back, delete it, edit it, change it. But if you sit there, the question I get asked the most, hands down the most, is how do I deal with writer's block? And, there are so many different ways to answer that question. Sometimes you just need to get away from your computer. You need a fresh perspective. You need to go outside and breathe and exercise, see your friends, see your family. Stop beating yourself up about it because you kind of make it worse if you're just constantly thinking, why can't I write? What is this going on? What is going on here? Sometimes, if you're a video gamer, play a video game. If you are if you like movies, that kind of thing, something that's going to open your creative brain in a way that isn't focused on your own creativity, but someone else's. For me personally, I will reread a book that I know that I love and I know that has inspired me and I know that speaks to me, and a book that makes me think, I wish I could create something like this, not in character and plot form, but in the way that it makes me feel.
Yes.
I want to make other people feel. So that all really inspires me and helps get me back on track and gets me kind of amps up my motivation. And for me also, it's not even a lack of, it's not even a writer's block, it's a writer's lack of motivation. It is that getting distracted by social media, falling down, the Pinterest rabbit hole, all these things that kind of steal your mind. But at the end of the day, all those things help. But at the end of the day, it is self-discipline and it is making yourself write. Even if you hit a block, even if you hit a wall, you just have to write through it. So which circles back to your question. And what I do is if I don't know what I'm doing, I have to kind of accept, I don't know what I'm doing. And I just have to start writing and see if it'll work out. And, 9 times out of 10, it will, because I know my characters and I know my book. But there will be times when I just have to, just keep writing and force the words out. And it's a bit like shooting bamboo down your fingernails and it hurts and it's painful and it's terrible writing. You just are so aware that it is the worst piece of trash that has ever, come to a screen, and you just have to keep writing it, and then you'll get through it and you'll get to a point where you're like, oh, okay, cool, I've hit my stride again, I know what's happening now. And then once you're through it and you can see where you've gotten to and where you're going, you can go back and change it or delete it. So that's to answer your question. No, I don't always know what I'm doing. Often I have no clue, but this is part of writing is beautiful and I love it. I love so many different parts of it. I can't imagine doing anything else, but it's also so hard. Like, there are days that you just want to tear your hair out. I love a quote by Ernest Hemingway, and he says, there is nothing at all to writing. All you do is sit down at a typewriter and bleed.
I love that one too.
Yeah.
I sometimes say it's not rocket science, but sometimes it just feels like it.
It really does. It really, yeah, especially if you're writing about rocket science. That's like a double whammy.
Just bring some elemental magic in, fix that right up.
Because it's totally relatable, right? I can talk to my own experience there.
So you touched on, going in and fixing things up, which brings us nicely to the question of editing. Can you take us through your editorial process for The Prison Healer? Firstly, do you edit as you go? How much editing do you put into that first draft? And then once it's sent off to your publisher, how does the editing process roll on from there?
Well, the first book in the Prison Healer series was different to probably every other book I've done, including the second 2 books. And every previous book. I've released 8 other books prior to this series. So The Prison Healer, because I wrote it so fast, I'm actually a really clean writer. What happens when I write over a longer period of time is I have a terrible memory and I start to repeat a lot of things, and because I forgot what I've written and whatever else. So that's one reason why I write so fast, is so that I remember what's happened in order to continue on. So I do really I write quite cleanly. So my own personal process is that I write the draft, and then I go back and I reread the draft once, and I'll pick out any kind of nitpicky kind of typos or anything, or might add a little a paragraph here or there, or clean up sentences or whatever. But it's usually a pretty solid draft. Now, at that point, I had an agent, and she was an editorial agent. And so she and I went through it, I think, once together. So she worked as an editor on it, in a sense, and we... there was a couple of things. She was American. She is still American. I should just no longer my agent. So she's still American. And because we were going for, until that point, I was really just an Australian author. But with her, we were going to aim for the global kind of reach with this book, which is what happened, which is amazing. But she came at it from an American perspective. And so one of the scenes, for example, she thought might be a little bit too brutal. And so, there's a scene towards the end where one of the characters is punished for something that they do, and they get whipped by the guards, and Kiva has to watch it, and it's really quite this traumatic. And so she wasn't sure if that might be a little bit too for the American market, at least, whether it might be a little bit too graphic. And so I pulled that entire scene out, for example. That's probably one of the major things I did in that first revision ended up being a kind of, it was then added as a paragraph as that, oh, this happened, because it's really integral to the plot. But it was Kiva had to watch this and it was really awful kind of thing. And then so I want to mention that, but I'll come back to that scene again in a second, because there was also another scene that we added early on. I added, but through her guidance. And it was to kind of build up a little bit more of Kiva's relationship with her dead father, because her father was sent to prison with her, and he died within a year of her arriving. And so she's dealing with the trauma of that, of knowing she's alone. The rest of her family, she has no idea how they are, where they are, what they're doing. And so I think I added in a few more kind of like memory scenes in order to build up that relationship so that there was a bit more of a lasting impact there. So that's kind of the minor thing that can have a lasting impact. That we worked on through those agent revisions. But then that scene at the end, I want to come back to that because interestingly, so I did take it out and I, glossed over it. And then we went out on submission to publishers, and it was snapped up really fast. It went in multiple auctions around the globe, which was so exciting. But as an author, I really rely on my gut and my gut instinct when it comes to writing. And the entire time it was on submission, I just kept thinking, and I'm a terrible author when it comes to this. So there's this mantra, it's like show, don't tell. And I tell so much in my writing. It's a natural fallback for me. I know there's a lot of, we really should show, and I do show a lot, but I also tell a lot, and I'm just aware of it. It's just my writing style. And this scene, it really bothered me that I'd taken it out and it had gone from show to tell. And especially because it is such an emotionally important scene, not just in that moment, but for everything that comes later in the later books. Like to have that scene between those two characters, that horrific moment that they shared that would bring nightmares to them later, and an emotional kind of attachment, to just have that summed up within a paragraph, it just did not do them justice. And so the whole time this book was on submission, I just had that in my head, and I was like, I kept thinking they're all going to hate it because that one scene is missing, not that anyone knew about it. But anyway, it went to submission, everything like that. I then ended up with these publishers. And so because I'm based in Australia, and the American publisher was going to take lead on it, which would mean they'd be my lead publishers, but I really wanted to work with an Australian editor as well. So what we did was we joined up my Australian editor, who's at Penguin Random House, and my US editor. And so they both decided that they would be happy to work on edits together for this, which has never, for me, never happened before. And it does have the risk of becoming a little bit like too many cooks spoil the pot at sometimes, because if you have an opinion with one editor that the other editor doesn't have the same opinion of it, it's like, oh, what do I listen to here?
Yeah, that's tough.
It is tough. But, so the edits came in the first round of edits, which was structural edits. And so it was talking about, a lot of things like adding scenes, deleting scenes. There was never any need to actually change the structure of the book. There was a bit too much. There was like a bit of like stuff that I pulled out because it was too so for example, I think when Kiva, the main character, volunteers to do this trial by ordeal, originally that was probably, I don't know, maybe 20 pages later. And so we really wanted to get that under the 100-page mark. So just sort of shortening and trimming and stuff at the beginning and building that pace up again, because again, it's YA, so we want to get into the action faster. So things like that. But during that edit, I thankfully was able to talk to these editors about that scene at the end and say, look, this is really bugging me. Like, it's my gut instinct is saying that this is really important. Can I know that this might be on the side of a little bit too brutal, but the rest of this book is also kind of brutal anyway. So, and especially because they asked me to add in, up until that point, I hadn't, talked about how horrible the guards were and how awful this prison is, but a lot of that was telling and not showing. And so they suggested I added a scene where we could see that. And it's a really awful scene, even if it doesn't.
I know which scene you're talking about.
I know. I'm like, this is pushing a line. Surely this is worse than to my thinking. I mean, nothing happens in it, but it's the way that it's written and the way that you're aware of, it's so implied, like you said, and that implication is a horrible, horrible implication. And I'm sitting there like, surely they're not okay with this, like my editors. And then I'm like, how can this be okay when like this scene that I pulled out that they've never read is like a different kind of horror, but it's like it was more physical horror than implied, you know, like, anyway. So I waited and they were fine with the new scene. I was like, okay, well, I'm going to try and see if I can sneak this one back in, because to me it's really important. And they loved it. They thought it really amplified, you know, everything. And I was like, okay, that makes me feel so much better, because I just, you know, when you have that instinct as a writer, you know, you would know this, that, you know, it's hard to chat to, you're like, am I just being protective of a darling that doesn't need to be there? You know, the saying, kill your darlings. Is this something that I just really loved, but it isn't necessary? Or is this actually necessary? So that was really, you know, really great. And I'm so glad that scene got to be returned, because it is so important. Yeah. But so things like that, the editing process, you know, that's how it worked. There's a lot of compromise, a lot of give, a lot of take, a lot of change, a lot of, you know, everything that happens like that. We did 2 rounds of structural edit, then it goes off to copy editing, and then the copy editing comments are always really interesting, because that's when a lot of like Australian gets turned to American. So like, you know, I'm sure there was a lot of examples in the Prison Healer, but I remember in my Whisper series, when I wrote a punnet of strawberries, the copy editor was like, what's a punnet? I was like, what do you mean what's a punnet? What do you call the things you put strawberries in? And they're like, a pint? Like a
pint?
What? It's ice cream. Like, and we don't even call it ice cream. It's like, I know, beer in Lord of the Rings. Like, I don't know. It was just, it's so interesting to see those little things that the copy editor finds, and like the discrepancies and stuff. And then, yeah. And so by that stage, by the time you're through the main structural edit rounds, it kind of gets a lot easier there. It's just the questions from the copy editor, and then the proofreading and all that sort of stuff. But that was essentially kind of how the editing process worked for that.
Yeah. So coming back to the series question, did you plan for this to be a series, The Prison Healer, when you started writing?
Yes, I always knew it would be a trilogy, at least in my mind. And thankfully, that's what the publishers bought it as, which was very fortunate at the time, because sometimes a publisher might just buy a first book and like, let's see how this goes. But I sent through a full synopsis of the series when we submitted, which nothing that happened in the second or third book really ended up happening in the books.
Oh, that's so interesting.
It started that way. The second book started, you know, when I went into writing the second, was like, right, crack my knuckles, I've got this, I know exactly what to do. And I was so proud, because like prior to this series, I haven't really been much of a plotter. I've been more of a pantser. And so, but I knew I had these ideas written down, and I had it exactly as it would be. But as I was writing the second book, a couple of new twists kind of hit me, and I was like, oh, I like that, and I like the way that direction to go. And so I might just tweak this just a little bit. And by the end of that book, I was like, well, half of what I wrote is probably maybe slightly similar. And so coming into the third book, which I've just written and just finished the second round of edits on, you know, I had to warn my editors when I sent it off to them, and I'd be like, don't bother reading the synopsis I sent you, because nothing except for the character names, nothing is the same. And that's purely because so much changed in the second book. But I think publishers kind of expect that. I think they like to get that synopsis as an idea that you are forward thinking, and you are aware that as a series the stakes have to get higher, and that you're aware of some ways that might happen. But I think they accept that, yeah, okay, that's not going to actually be what happens. We'll see where it goes.
How do you know when an idea is a series and can be sustained over a whole series?
I think probably the best example I can give you for this is from my Whisper Duology. And so when I went into writing Whisper, I thought it would be a trilogy. I was like, I feel as though I have a vague feeling of this as a trilogy. But when I finished writing the first book, it was such a short, sharp writing style that I thought, yes, I could turn this into a trilogy. But if all the stuff that I want from the second book gets spread out over 2 more books, it's not going to be as tight, and it's not going to be as sharp. And it's, you know, it'll be fine, 2 fine books, but I want one good book. One book that does the series justice. And so that's when I was like, this needs to be shorter. It needs to just be 2 books. But until that moment, you know, I guess I finish the first book and then I decide. And so once I finished The Prison Healer, I knew the ending of the second book. So if that makes sense. So by the time I finished the end of the first book, I knew where the second book would end. And I knew that wouldn't be the end of the series. I knew that there would have to be at least 1 more book. And writing the third book, there was a point when I was halfway through and I thought, there is so much that still needs to happen. This might need a 4th book. But by that stage, I was contracted on 3 books. And so I was like, I don't know how they're going to be okay with that. And so thankfully, it's like the most epic book I've probably ever written, but It's all in one book. And so I'm really excited for that book to come out. That's The Blood Trader, and I think it comes out next year. So, exciting. That was terrifying. But with the Medoran Chronicles, this is the most stupid answer I'll probably ever give. But I purely, when I went into writing that book, it's the first, Akane is the first book, and it's the first book I ever wrote. And I never intended for it to get published. I never intended for anyone to read it. But I remember sitting down and starting, I was like, you know what? If I'm going to write a series, Harry Potter is 7 books, Twilight is 4 books, you know, Vampire Academy, I think, is 5 books. So, and I went through all the different series that were really popular at the time. I remember thinking, I'm going to do 5 books. 5 books sounds good. I can't think of any other. Yeah, I was like, I can't think of any other 5-book series. So that's good. And so it did end up being 5 books, but then I added a novella collection, so it kind of made it 6 books in the end anyway. So there was no like actual plotting reason for it. It was just, this sounds like a nice idea. So,
and so let's take the character arc. So we've got Kiva's story in The Prison Healer, and then she sort of goes on a bit of a journey, and she comes out of herself a bit, and she discovers within her that she can be a little bit more open to people. And then there's that compelling, amazing twist at the end, which I cannot talk about, but people, you just have to read the book to find out what it was. And then, so with the next book, The Gilded Cage, are you then saying, well, now what do I need for Kiva's next part of her journey to be in terms of her personal development?
Yeah, I think, I mean, given the ending of The Prison Healer, it was extremely complicated because I had to dive deep into Kiva's psyche and to decide who I wanted her to be next, because I could have, you know, there's a few different directions I could go in. And so I had to decide who I wanted her to be, if I wanted her to keep that compassion that she had for so long. And that's so intrinsic to who she is. And it was really important for me that she stays in character as we know her. So I think it had to come back to a different kind of question. And that was, what do I want her to achieve in this book? And not from a physical goals perspective, but from an internal goals. And so I mentioned before, I mean, we both did, that so much of The Prison Healer is Kiva learning to trust other people, and her learning to let down her walls, and her learning that it's okay, you know, to let other people in. But so much of The Gilded Cage is Kiva having to learn to trust herself and to trust her own judgment and to trust that what she might think is right or wrong, you know, to trust that intuition within her. And that's really difficult given the situations that she finds herself in and the people that she finds herself around. And so, you know, there is, I think probably the hardest part of this book was that she comes across naive a lot of the time, but that's purely because the decisions she has to make are based on 10 years of being imprisoned and not having to make these kind of decisions before. And, you know, ultimately she is a teenager. Yeah. And so these questions are this battle of wills within her and this emotional trauma of trying to figure out what is right and what is wrong and how to reconcile them when they may or may not go against everything she always believed. So I had to hold on to that. There's going to come a point where someone is going to lose, and someone she cares about. So there is no winning for her. So it's her decision as to who is going to hurt the most and how she can sort of deal with that fallout kind of thing, and whose side she'll be on. And there is no winning for her. And so her having to trust her own instinct is what kind of guided that decision.
Yeah. Now we have some questions from listeners. Joe asked, do you always have a target audience in mind for each book? Do you think I'm writing this as a YA crossover, or do you leave all that to your editors and marketers? I'm asking this from the perspective of a YA adult fantasy categorisation at the library and bookshop level, which gets tricky. Often libraries, in particular school libraries, will make a fuss about swearing and sex scenes, but bookshops will still shelve Sarah J. Maas and J. Christoph in the YA section regardless. Do you find you censor yourself as you write, or do you just write what you want to write and let the bookshops and libraries decide?
I mean, it's a great question, and it's a really involved question as well. And I know that J. Christoph and Sarah Maas would be the first people to be like, why are you shelving our books in YA? I mean, they're like, this is ridiculous. I mean, Jay in particular is often like, this is not a YA book, you know, yeah. I think the categorization is purely for, you know, for booksellers and for librarians. I think a really good example here is the new adult category, which is a lot of YA is reading up these days. The characters are a little bit older. There is more swearing. There is more sex. And so it's not quite YA in the sense of that 12 to 16-year-old category. It's more like these characters are 18, 19, and they're doing more mature things. But there is no real new adult category. Like, it's been a bit of a grey area for so long. That's where like Sarah's and Jay's books would fit into that kind of thing. And so they're still written with that fast-paced, high character, high action adventure drive, and therefore they're being, I wouldn't say they're being marketed as YA. I think marketers, like, you know, Sarah's example, her A Court of Thorns and Roses series, they brought out a whole new heap of rebranding. They changed the covers to make them more adult as those books got more adult, but still they're being put in YA genre areas in bookstores and stuff. And Jay, you know, like, again, similarly, there's that grey area. His characters might be teenagers, but the content of the books are absolutely not, you know, YA books. And so, as an author, I don't think about that in the sense of where my books will sit on a shelf, purely because I know what I write, and I know I'm not going to put in a heavy sex scene. I know I'm not going to put in a lot of like the more explicit swearing. I know, you know, that's purely just because that's the way I write. Even if I was to write an adult fantasy book, you know, and like to move straight out of YA into, you know, adult, I still don't even think I would have those things, which would be really then interesting if I would then be categorized into YA. But I mean, again, Sarah wrote Crescent City, which is actually an adult fantasy. And I was at Big W walking through the book section yesterday, and it was in the YA section, and Crescent City is just not, it's not YA. Like, no one has marketed that from the beginning. So this question, the categorization and the genres really is just for where it can go on a shelf, and that it's needed in that sense, because you can't have a chaotic bookstore where, you know, everything is everywhere and no one knows how to find anything. But it is also just something that I, as an author, I don't think about. I have an awareness in my head of I mentioned before in the editing part, you know, of where is the line to not cross, you know. So this world of the prison healer is set in a prison, and there are things that I could have put on page, but I chose not to because that would have been too explicit. You know, there are implications of things, but I would never show those things. Interestingly, coming into the third book in this series, The Blood Trader, it's the first book in this, like, this series has a lot of triggering things, but they're not so horrifically triggering that as my publishers or my editors or I needed to have kind of trigger warnings on it. If readers want those, they can find them online, but it didn't need like a mark on the book. But coming into the third book, I actually opened it with a note from me to readers saying, if you've come this far, you'll know that this series has some dark themes, but coming into this book, they're just a little bit more. So, you know your triggers. You might be triggered. And again, there's nothing horrific on page, but there's a lot more mental pain, I guess I would say, in that third book, a lot more emotional fallout, a lot more things that some people just might be a little bit more sensitive towards, especially teenagers. Because in the back of my mind, I always have to remember I am writing to teenagers. Like, a lot of my demographic is adults. Like, that's just the way it is. Like, as an adult, I read YA, and, you know, a lot of the people who read my books are adults, but I am writing to teenagers. So I'm always going to want to try and protect them as much as I can. And even if that's in ways of so my novella collection for the Medoran Chronicles deals with a lot of mental health. There's talk about a suicide of a family member in there. There is there's the death of a parent. There's a few things like that. So at the end of that book, I actually there's a list of like helplines that you can call if you were triggered by anything in that book. So like Lifeline and all the different kind of, you know, phone people who you can talk to if something like that upsets you. So it's stuff like that. It's just being aware of who I'm writing to is important in the sense of knowing what lines not to cross, but it doesn't stop me from writing anything that, you know, if I was ever to cross those lines, then that would be a different conversation with my publishers about where the book would sit. And again, it wouldn't stop me from writing it. It would just be then talking about how they essentially would deal with where that goes and how it's then who it goes to. So, I mean, even just in the small things like the Prison Healer, if you go to like the Dimmick's website, I think it says 14 plus, you know, whereas my Medoran books would say 10 plus or 12 plus or something. It's a hard question to answer because so much of it is outside of me.
Yeah, you've answered it from your perspective in that it doesn't change your writing style, and your writing style has your audience in mind. But I take my hat off to you, because that must be such a balance, because on the one hand you want to bring up issues that teenagers can relate to and be relatable, but not go so far as to be completely triggering and traumatic for them.
Exactly. I think the main thing is I try to nurture people through it. So the Prison Healer, if we were to put that in a nutshell, is it is a dark book, but my whole point of that book is to show that there can still be light in the darkest of places. There can still be hope. There can still be goodness. And so that's what I want people to take away from the book, is that even in the worst of places, and if we use this as a metaphor, even in the worst of situations in our own lives, even no matter what we're going through, no matter what the darkness is, no matter what we are struggling with, no matter how hard life gets, there is always goodness and there is always hope. So to never forget that. And that is kind of what I try to guide especially the teenagers towards. And so there will always be in my writing, there'll always be that nurturing, that comfort, that protection. But at the same time, you don't want to baby them, because you can tell that, like, this is a death prison. And I can't just say, oh no, she got a slap on the wrist. Like, that's not, people will just kind of be like, yeah, this stinks. You know, like, it's not, you gotta be as real as you can, but also as protective as you can. And try to juggle that as well as possible.
Speaking of young people, Penelope Janu has sent in a question. She says, Lynette is an inspiration to younger writers because she's made a career out of writing successfully full-time. At what point did she have the confidence to write full-time, and what is her advice to other younger writers who'd like to write fiction as a career?
Ooh, that's a loaded question. Okay. I'll do it in two parts. The first part about at what point did I have the confidence to write full time? I don't know if I have confidence at all. No. So it was actually accidental. I was coming into this second book of my Medoran Chronicles. I was in no way able to financially handle, writing full time at that point. But my actual job closed. So I'd been there for 5 years, I think, and so my job, it changed from a photography studio to a personal development company, and then it was slowly shutting down from that. And so with the changeover, I actually started writing for them with blogs and interviews and stuff like that, which was really cool, but my heart wasn't in it because it wasn't creative writing. It was interviewing people and more a journalistic thing, and I just didn't enjoy it. And I found that it made me stop enjoying my fiction writing as well, because if I was writing in my day job in a real life kind of thing, and then I got home at night and I wrote in a creative kind of thing, I was kind of written out by then, and switching my brain between the two, I just didn't enjoy. So when the work closed down, I decided, okay, I'm going to give myself a year. I have enough savings to give myself a year to see if I can actually do this. And it was a big risk. It was such a huge risk. But I was at a point in life when I was able to take that risk. And I thought, if I give myself those 12 months, at least I have an end date for looking for a new job if I need a new job. And it just worked out that I didn't. By the time that 12 months was over, I was getting a lot of, I still wasn't really getting, I wouldn't say I had enough royalties or anything coming in to help me survive purely by the books. But I was getting a lot of invitations to schools and a lot of invitations to events, and they all, they pay. Well, at that point, I was, published enough that they would pay me for it. And so that was enough of an income for me.
Yeah, that's great.
So now, thankfully, timing wise, especially with COVID, I'm able to survive, very, fine without needing those events, which since the last year,
thankfully,
I've been very blessed. I know it's not the case often in Australia, and I am the first person to warn any aspiring authors not to quit their day jobs, because it is very, very hard, especially in this country. I think, I haven't looked at the stats for a while, but I think a couple of years ago when I was looking at the stats and wondering if I could survive, I think the average Australian author makes an average, but higher than average Australian author makes about 14,000 a year, 7 to 14,000 a year on this. And, if you have a family, if you have anything, it's just...
Yeah, you can't live on that.
You can't live on that. I don't even know if you can, these days, I don't think you can get your car insurance. No. But yeah, so now thankfully I'm able to do that, but it's not something I would advise unless you are really confident and I mean, or unless you have, I know a lot of authors who maybe have a partner who is able to, carry that weight and give them that time they need. And like, I didn't have that. So I was just fully having to figure out if I could do it on my own. But if you do have that, then that's great. Give yourself the chance, but do it carefully and, just monitor and see if you need to stop doing that.
So for younger writers who'd like to write fiction as a career, number one tip, don't give up your day job.
Don't give up your day job. No. But the other, I feel like this is kind of the hard advice to give, but I think also be aware of the reality that it may not happen. And I say that in a sense that make sure it's what you want. Make sure, because at the end of the day, if you don't ever get a publishing deal, if you love what you do, that's all that matters. If you love writing, if you can't imagine a world where you're not writing, if it is your dream to write, then it doesn't matter, if that never happens in the wide scale sense. There are so many avenues to you now. There's self-publishing. There's so many different online ways to make people have access to your book. But if your dream is to write, then write for yourself, because the thing is, if you do get a publishing offer, it only takes one. That's the thing. It takes one yes, and all the no's mean nothing. I sent out hundreds of queries to my first book before, it was rejected for years and years and years before I was given an offer. This is all part of the process, and it only took one yes. But once that yes happens, you will never write another book without having that fear of expectation on you. So any book you write before you have a publishing deal is just for you, and it's such a beautiful feeling. You can throw it out if you hate it, or you can nurture it and love it if you don't. But after that point, once you're on a contract, you're always going to be like, is this good enough? Are people going to like it? Are my publishers going to like it? What if it doesn't sell? There are so many stresses and pressures, and you have to silence those voices, and doing that is really hard, but it means you will never have another book that is just yours. So my advice to young authors is enjoy the process. Do it because you love to do it, because you can't not do it, and anything else is a bonus from there.
Yeah. And also what you were saying too about the bum glue and the discipline, and just sitting, even if you're not feeling it, just sit down and the words will come.
Yeah. And also from a practical level, make sure you read a lot. Read and read and read and read and read, because that's how you, I don't have a degree in creative writing. I never took a class in creative writing. The first workshop I ever went to, I taught, the first writing workshop. And I remember it so clearly, because I'm I just remember I must have still been working at the time, and because I remember thinking I need to go and find a writing workshop before I actually have to do one. And I just didn't have the time to do it. And I remember going, I remember being at the front of the room like, oh, I hope no one turns up, because I just didn't know what I was doing. Never, anyway. So that was, that went fine, thankfully. And yeah.
Oh, well done. That must have been, terrifying on a whole other level.
Oh, yeah. The point is just read, because if you read, you get an idea of what's good, what's not good, and also what you like. And so the reading is important.
Actually, Penelope did also ask what you read. Do you read outside YA?
Yeah, I like to keep up with what's happening with YA, because, it's important to see how it's changing. And it really has, especially in the last couple of years, there's been a lot of change in the YA books. You read a YA book that was released 5 years ago compared to a YA book that's released now, and it's just it's not even subtle differences. There are massive differences in content and in language and in even in explicit scenes, what's allowed now compared to what was allowed then. And I remember just the shifts are so huge. But I also, for myself, I also need to get away from YA sometimes. I need to, if I'm having a rough time, I need to read a nice contemporary romance that's just feel good. It's going to end well. It's not going to have a cliffhanger ending, which so many books do.
Or a death prison. No death prisons in romance.
But yes, so, I do love that. I love a good thriller sometimes. It'll just sort of keep me on the edge of my seat. I was
going to say too, because with your book, as I was reading it, I thought, I wonder if Lynette reads romance, because there's elements of romance, there's elements of thriller, there's elements of crime.
you know?
Yeah, well, that's it. I feel like if you read widely, like I don't ever really want my own writing to be put in a box. I don't want to be just a formulaic writer. You know, I think there's a big risk of that for so many writers, and especially in YA, there's a formula. You know it. Like you read a book, and within the first 10 pages, you know exactly how the book is going to end. And so I try to break out of that mold. There's a few twists in The Prison Healer, and like one of them is just so obvious for the entire book, and I've used that knowing that people will clue on very quickly about what it is. But I've used that as a distraction from the other twist, so that you're too busy focusing on I know what's going to happen here, that you don't think outside of what else might happen here. And so, I think a lot of that, I learned that from thrillers or like the crime ones, when you're like, I think that's the bad guy, but it could be that person, or it might be this person, or maybe it's the one that it's always going to be the person that, that everyone likes, and whatever. So
I don't know what it says about me, but I didn't see that twist coming either.
I didn't want you to see it, but I thought some of the people who read a lot in this genre might be aware that I don't want, like, a lot of people have been surprised by it, and that's the aim.
Yes, I got the double whammy.
Good. Well, it's the lower twist, like it's the less subtle twist, I guess I could say. Whereas the funny thing is, if you ever went back into a reread of this, the other twists are just, now that you know them, you'll see all the foreshadowing and everything that's moving through. But
I think I'll have to reread it. Finally, did the writing of The Prison Healer teach you anything new about writing craft or process? What did this book teach you?
I still feel like, it happened so fast. And my first book came out in 2015. So I still, it's not like it's been over 11 years or whatever. So in my brain, I'm still so inexperienced, and there's so much I still need to learn, and there's always going to be things I learn. So I think this book, I was really privileged, I guess, to work with my two editors, my American editor, my Australian editor, who just had a wealth of knowledge, both of them, editorial directors. So they're like the top of everything that they could be, and they just have so much experience, and I really gleaned so much from them. I'm one of those kind of authors who sucks things in like a sponge, and I always want to learn more, and I want my next book to always be my best book. And I want my next book after that to always be my best book. I always want to try and improve, not just for like the sake of my readers, but because I want to improve my craft. So The Prison Healer, I think, especially over the course of this series, I learned a lot about less is more, I guess. Like in some ways, like I'll go back and reread my Medoran Chronicles, which is my first books, and I'll say something in 3 sentences that could have been said in 3 words, and it's fine. That was the writing style then, and it really kind of immersed you into it and made you really feel everything. But in The Prison Healer, to keep those intense moments, especially in those really thriller kind of moments and in those like high stakes moments, if you use your writing, it's not just, it's a tool that you can use. You can have short, sharp, choppy sentences that can actually give emotion and give that urgency, or you can have a nice longer lyrical kind of prose that might be a really beautiful emotional kind of soft moment. And so learning how to use different words in different ways and different sentence structure, I really enjoyed that, and a lot of it is intuitive, but I really got to hone in on that in these books in a way that I hadn't in any other of my previous books. So and especially in the second book, for example, I had to cut 30,000 words because the word count was too much. And that was really challenging for me because I am a longer writer. But it just was, and it was a really hard comment because my editors were like, everything in this book is really, really needed, but we need you to bring this word count down. And I was like, but that doesn't help me tell me what to take out, so I had to fine tooth comb every single sentence and pull out every unneeded word. And that was really incredibly challenging. But then going into writing the third book, it meant I had a sharper eye for what was and what wasn't needed. So I think I'm always going to be learning, and I really hope I'm always learning. And these books have just taught me so much about how to write and how to write better, but also make me realize, I'm still not a good writer. Like, I don't mean that in like a
Lynette.
I just mean, no, I will always be my worst critic, and I will always see the flaws in my own writing. And I think that's just part of being an author sometimes, and I'm okay with that. And it also I like that because it means I'm always going to keep trying. And so that's kind of important to me.
Well, you're a wonderful writer, and it says right here on the back of the book, Australia's #1 best-selling YA author. So a lot of people would disagree with you about being a terrible writer, Lynette.
Oh, thank you.
Tell us what's happening now. So you've got Gilded Cage is just about to come out, then the 3rd book next year. So what's next in the works for you?
Oh, I have no idea. I think when you come to the end of a series, you have kind of a blank canvas. And so I have a lot of ideas rolling around in my head. But the thing about this series has come out really fast. We had like an accelerated release. So it was 6 monthly releases, and it's just, and in a pandemic time, it has not been ideal. Like that was decided before, at the end of 2019, before COVID hit. And so that's been really hard. It's been really hard on the publishing industry as a whole. It's been really hard on me as an author, as like for personal, for the same reasons everyone has had.
Yeah.
It's very hard on our little creative minds to deal with everything.
Yeah.
And so I think, I think for a bit, I just need to give my brain a little bit of a space to kind of, I talked before about my advice to young writers is to, write the book that that means something to you, that speaks to you, that you have no pressure on yourself and you just love to write. And I'm coming into a space where I could do that. I'm not on a contract. I am deliberately not hopping on a contract at the moment because I just want whatever I write next to be something that kind of comes from my heart. And then once it's done, I can then go through the process all over again. So, I'm just going to take a little bit of time to be, I guess, gentle with my creative mind. And I think a lot of authors, myself included, have really skated burnout in the last little while. And so I think when you're aware of that, you have to kind of just be so careful because it can have such longer lasting effects if you're not on that. So I need to monitor that, be careful of that, and then write just from my heart. And that's what I'm going to do next.
Well, that is a wonderful note to end on. Lynette, thank you so much for talking to me today. There was so much great stuff in there, and I think the writers who are listening are going to get so much out of it. So thank you.
You are welcome. Thank you so much for being a great host.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
There you go, the fabulous Lynette Noni. Please do go and check out Lynette's website at lynnettenoni.com and follow her on her socials where she shares videos and giveaways and the most amazing fan art. I would love to have Lynette's fans, they're incredible. Lynette is brilliant at the marketing side of being an author, so her website and socials are really worth checking out if you're an author in the same space to really see how it's done. And of course, The Prison Healer and all of her novels are available wherever you buy your books. There's a link on the website, writersbookclubpodcast.com, where you'll also find the show notes for today's episode. Now to our October book. I'm so thrilled to be chatting with one of my favourite authors, Jessica Detman. Jess writes the kind of engaging, warm and funny novels that I just love, and she's just as warm and hilarious in real life, and you should all immediately go and follow her on Instagram and Twitter. We are going to be diving into Jessica's latest novel, This Has Been Absolutely Lovely. What a great title, hey? Let me tell you a bit about it. Molly is a millennial home organiser about to have her first baby. Obviously her mum Annie will help with the childcare. Everyone else's parents are doing it. But Annie's dreams of music stardom have been on hold for 35 years, paused by childbirth, then buried under her responsibilities as a mother, wage earner, wife, and the only child of ailing parents. Finally, she can taste freedom. As Molly and her siblings gather in the close quarters of the family home over one fraught summer, shocking revelations come to light, and everyone is forced to confront the question of what it means to be a family. This Has Been Absolutely Lovely is a story about growing up and giving in, of parents and children, hope and failure, bravery and defied expectation, and whether it's ever too late to try again. Sounds great, doesn't it? I've read it twice now, and I really recommend it. Before becoming a writer, Jess worked for many years as a book editor, so I'm looking forward to getting her insights into the process from both the writing and the editing perspective. Now, I'm giving away a copy of this fabulous novel, so head over to the Writers Book Club Instagram and Facebook accounts to enter. The entries close on October the 7th. Thanks again for joining me this month. I've been getting some lovely feedback from you about these chats, saying that you're getting a lot out of the podcast and it's really helping with your own writing. And this makes me very happy because it's exactly why I started the podcast. Please feel free to leave a rating or review over on Apple Podcasts, as I believe it helps other writers and readers to find it, and hopefully it'll help them too. Last but certainly not least, this podcast was recorded on the beautiful unceded lands of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. Have a great month, everyone, and happy writing.